story begins with a man named Stephen, a fringe painter who, despite his lack of fame, had a gift for painting. At that time, George, a famous painter, was the talk of the town. He came to the marketplace and threw a handful of cash at Stephen. He smugly said that Stephen's painting had sold for an incredible amount, but George was only giving him a fraction of the price. To add insult to injury, the woman next to George was Stephen's ex-girlfriend, Corey. George had deliberately brought her along so she could see for herself that leaving Stephen was the right decision. After all, if she hadn't, she'd be living a hard life and riding in that cheap car that belonged to Stephen. Stephen's days were a parade of bad luck. He was already living in poverty, his girlfriend had dumped him like a bad habit, and now he was getting ripped off for his paintings. To top it all off, when he got home, the landlord was waiting to collect the rent. Long story short, Stephen met up with a man named Jack and gave him the last of his money so he could participate in a painting exhibition. Jack told him that Stephen's painting was a total mess, especially when compared to George's art, which looked incredibly realistic. The irony was, it was actually Stephen's painting that George had paid for. It was revealed that George used Stephen's painting to gain his fame. The only person who actually admired Stephen's paintings was Christy, a beautiful woman who worked at a nearby salon. But this was a strange thing to hear. How could Christy know that Stephen's paintings were any good when she turned out to be a blind woman? Being a blind woman, Christy was often harassed by lecherous men, but luckily, Stephen came just in time every time to help, although he often got beaten in the end.
你听听，我是用什么拍的？
大哥，你别闹。
这边，对，拍的话我得拍这边。
你干啥呀？
To pay for his kindness, Christy would sometimes tease Stephen. She would lean for a kiss. That moment, though, as Stephen leaned in to kiss her, it turned out another person named Manny was there. And Christy, who couldn't see him, eventually found out that they weren't alone. Long story short, Stephen and Manny were together, drinking. Manny, who was desperate for a girlfriend, thought he could win over his idol, a streamer named Jess, by getting her money. He bought hundreds of lottery tickets to get instant results, resorting to silly methods like this. When they were completely hammered, Stephen suddenly came to and saw a ship in the sky. He woke Manny up, but he didn't get a peep out of him. The ship emitted a light, and 3 strange aliens came down. Stephen, whose curiosity was at an all-time high, saw it all and quickly whipped out his phone to record it. But the phone's light scared them, and the aliens accidentally left behind a small stick before disappearing. Stephen's curiosity got the better of him, and he went and picked it up. The next morning, Stephen immediately told Manny what he had seen. When Manny heard it, he asked if the alien looked like the one he had drawn before. Stephen was shocked to his core when he saw the painting. It turned out the alien was indeed similar to something Manny had painted. They were convinced it was just a crazy dream, especially since they were trashed last night. But Stephen felt that something was off. If it was a dream, the alien stick shouldn't be sitting right on his desk. Long story short, Stephen was painting a picture of a beautiful woman when his pencil broke. He looked for another pencil and accidentally used the alien stick, and in that moment, his drawing turned into reality. Stephen was curious. He finally decided to draw an apple to test his suspicion, and when he finished the painting, it literally turned into a real apple. Baffled, he wondered if this apple was real or not, so he took a bite. It turned out it was. Stephen immediately went back to his apartment and asked Manny to give him a kick, thinking he was dreaming. Feeling the pain, he became more and more convinced that this was no dream. Stephen then told him that what he saw last night was not a dream, but reality. Whatever he drew with the pencil would become real. Manny didn't believe him. He felt that Stephen had lost his mind. To get Manny to believe him, Stephen drew a picture of a gold bar, but nothing happened. Manny was even more convinced it was all a wild goose chase, so he tore up the painting. But then, to his complete shock, the paper he had thrown turned into solid gold bars. Without a second thought, they immediately drew more gold. Not satisfied with that, they also drew their dream house. And suddenly, the house appeared in the middle of a crowded street. Everyone was baffled, and the police eventually came to check out the commotion. Stephen and Manny panicked, worried they would get caught. They thought that if they could remove the painting, the house would disappear too. But they didn't have an eraser. As they were thinking, Stephen noticed a button on the stick. When he pressed it, it sucked up the pencil dust. As the painting got sucked into the stick, the house suddenly vanished like it had never existed. They realized that painting a house would lead to the same problem all over again. So Manny suggested a new strategy. Stephen should just draw money. Out of curiosity, Stephen tried drawing a 200 million yuan note, but all that came out was the number 200 million. It was then that Stephen understood how the stick worked. He then quickly drew a wad of bills. They waited for the money to appear, and to their utter disbelief, not only did 200 million yuan come out, but even more, flooding the entire apartment. They were now rolling in the dough with beautiful maids, expensive vintage cars, and they even paid for their neighbor's boarding costs for 100 years. On the other side of town, George and Corey were trying to buy a house. The price was 10 million yuan. George felt that was way too expensive and tried to bargain for a 50% discount. But the real estate agent just smiled and told him that elite houses were non-negotiable. Suddenly, Stephen and Manny walked in. George immediately started running his mouth, telling them it was useless for them to even try to buy a house there. But George's face went completely blank when Stephen and Manny said they wanted to buy the house. Their luxurious house was officially purchased, putting an end to all of George and Corey's gloating. That night, Stephen was all set to propose to Christy, but she turned him down. She told him that she felt she didn't deserve to be with a rich man, especially because she was blind. Stephen was caught off guard but tried to explain that he wasn't really rich. He was just lucky because he found a magic pencil from an alien who had come down to Earth. As he was telling the story, a real alien spacecraft flew overhead. Christy, on the other hand, believed that what he was saying was true and wanted him to grant her wish, which was to have eyes. To grant her wish, Stephen painted 2 eyeballs, but instead of going into Christy's eyes, they stuck to Manny's shoulders. Christy was convinced they were playing a prank on her and left to continue working. But Manny quickly yelled out, telling her she didn't have to work anymore because she was a rich man's girl now. He asked Christy to be patient until they could figure out a way to get her eyes. Manny advised Stephen to draw Christy from head to toe, with normal eyes this time. Stephen asked what if they ended up with 2 Christys. Manny laughed and said he would have 2 wives. Stephen finally started, painting a portrait of Christy. After finishing, he hoped he would succeed this time. Manny woke up after 5 hours of sleep, and he was completely surprised because the painting was so incredibly beautiful. But nothing really happened to Christy. But then, as she walked out of the house, she disappeared as if sucked into a hidden portal, and shortly after, reappeared now, with a pair of working eyes. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, a woman suddenly lost her eyes. That's when the major plot twist was revealed. It turned out the magic pencil didn't create new things. It simply moved existing ones. The beautiful villa they had been living in had actually belonged to someone else. The antique car they had been driving also belonged to a completely oblivious man. The car suddenly disappeared while he was driving down the street, leaving him disoriented from the friction of the asphalt. To make things even clearer, the police were completely confused because while Stephen got his mountains of money, the money in the bank disappeared from its original location, and it was shown on CCTV. While the strange phenomenon of things disappearing happened, Stephen, Manny, Christy, and even Jess, the famous streamer Manny idolized, were living it up, enjoying their new wealth. They went on vacation, rode in a hot air balloon, and even bought an expensive fireworks show. Christy was over the moon because this was the first time she could enjoy the beauty of the world. Long story short, they decided to hold a painting exhibition for Stephen and tried to rent a space from Jack. But Jack just insulted them as poor painters and told them to get lost. They just shrugged it off and said they'd look for someone else since Jack didn't want the several million yuan they were offering. Hearing that, Jack's expression turned 180 degrees. He immediately approved their request, even treated them like kings. On the other hand, George was shocked to see a huge billboard promoting Stephen's exhibition. He started thinking about how in the world did Stephen get that money to promote a painting exhibition that could cost millions of yuan? The suspicion in his bald head was off the charts. It really didn't make any sense. Just yesterday, they were poor, and now they were swimming in money. George even ended up in a huge fight with Corey over it. He finally decided to call Captain Robert, a police detective who was investigating the mysterious disappearance of goods and money. George spilled the beans and told him that Stephen and Manny had suddenly become rich, even though they were initially so poor they couldn't even buy food. Captain Robert knew he had to investigate immediately. Long story short, Stephen's exhibition began. Stephen was now getting famous, and when he was about to give his autograph, he approached Jack and asked if the visitors liked his paintings. Jack just replied that everything was perfect, but Stephen didn't believe it and asked for his honest opinion. To make sure, Stephen tried to disguise himself and walk among the crowd, but Captain Robert, who was also present there, saw him and thought he was trying to make a run for it. During the painting auction, Stephen saw Captain Robert and immediately asked Jack if he recognized him. Feeling something was fishy, Jack approached the captain and asked for his invitation letter. But without missing a beat, Captain Robert and his colleagues showed their police badges, and things turned upside down for Stephen. Now, Stephen and Manny were both being interrogated. The police asked how they became so rich in an instant. Stephen and Manny were confused about what was wrong with their wealth. The captain explained that a bank with hundreds of millions of yuan in its safe was missing, and the serial numbers on the money they owned were an exact match. Plus, a classic car exactly matched theirs was also missing, and Captain Robert demanded to see proof of their car purchase to see if they really bought the car. Manny and Stephen were shell-shocked. They knew they were cornered without any way to prove their point. In the end, Stephen confessed. He claimed to have special powers, and to get Captain Robert and his team to believe him, Manny made a bold offer. He told the officers to name their price, offering to bring the latest Ferrari model right to them. Sure enough, in the blink of an eye, the car was right in front of them. With this, the police couldn't find any evidence and couldn't charge them as suspects. Stephen and Manny soon found out that their wild story had already gone viral. Stephen immediately realized that when he had drawn the 100 million yuan bill, the money that appeared had actually come from a bank. And the villa he had drawn had actually come from another place. The magic pencil only had the ability to move whatever Stephen drew from somewhere else. That included the money, the cars, and even Christie's eyes. Meanwhile, Captain Robert received a report that a red Ferrari had gone missing. When he checked the details, it was an exact match for the one sitting in front of him. The captain finally connected the dots. He investigated further right in front of Stephen's house, and he had made sure his suspicion was correct. Unfortunately, Captain Robert said that in this country, there was no law for people with superpowers, so it was hard to bring them to court because there was no evidence to charge them. Meanwhile, inside the house, Stephen and Manny felt completely innocent. They hadn't robbed anyone. They had just painted. It wasn't them who targeted the missing things. Suddenly, Corey came there. Her arrival was only to apologize, telling Stephen that she regretted leaving him and picking George, who had been so violent that he had left her bruised. What she didn't realize was that George had planted a camera on her necklace. That night, Stephen got wasted and, completely oblivious to the camera, showed the alien pencil to Corey. The moment was recorded, and George finally had evidence to bring Stephen to court. The next morning, Stephen decided to hand the pencil over to the police and put an end to all of this. He and Manny had come to a grim conclusion. Living rich but not peacefully was the same as committing suicide. It was much better to live as they were and be happy. Jess, who had apparently overheard their conversation, finally understood the whole story. Manny was scared of losing her, but what he didn't know was that Jess had loved him not because of his wealth, but because of his good looks. After everyone came to an agreement, they finally opened the safe containing the magical pencil. But to their shock, they discovered that George had stolen the pencil the night before. That very same day, George had used the pencil and had gotten a helicopter. Up in the air, he immediately began to draw something else. George had gone completely off the rails. He created a royal, magnificent palace in the middle of town. Meanwhile, Corey was tied up and about to be thrown away. His two lackeys asked him why he got rid of his woman, but George just shrugged her off, saying she was no one to him. His girl was the most beautiful woman in the world, and as soon as he showed the painting, the woman suddenly appeared. The woman was so shocked, feeling like it was all just a dream, but she finally realized it was not. Soon, Stephen and Captain Robert managed to find them. Stephen pleaded with George to get rid of the palace painting because it was a ticking time bomb. It had been created right on top of the airport, and it might disrupt the place. Stephen tried to reason with him, explaining that the pencil didn't create new things, but just moved existing ones, and that what he had painted had stolen other people's wealth. But George didn't care. He would just paint money. But Captain Robert told him that if he dared to paint again, he would be shot. George just laughed and said he would escape to another planet using a spaceship he found on Google. While painting the photo of the spaceship, he had no idea that it was actually the alien spaceship that owned the magical pencil. Suddenly, the alien spaceship showed up in front of them. The alien came down the spaceship and immediately asked where its pencil was. Steven pointed toward George, but George had already painted a tank and was ready to shoot them. However, the aliens had strength beyond human level. They bent the tank's gun barrel straight toward the cabin, leaving George no choice but to surrender. In the end, George handed over the pencil, and the alien was about to kill him. But luckily, Steven asked the alien to forgive him, explaining that it was his fault for finding the pencil in the first place. The alien then said that Earth was a lot like their planet, a place where justice was destroyed by greed. When the aliens were about to leave, Steven asked them to return the palace to its original place. As a reward, Steven offered to buy them a meal. After everything was returned to its original state, the alien approached Christy, and the pair of eyes she had been borrowing were returned to their rightful owner. She was blind again, and the alien promised not to bother Earth again. But unfortunately, their plane had also been lost. Everything was now back to normal, but with a magical experience they would never forget.